Hi, this is Robert from Part Fusion Electronics. I'm back looking at making a more refined version of my giant LED. And so what I'm going to look at in this video is the leg details and the internal details. So normally an LED will have a short lead and a long lead. So the short lead is the cathode or the negative side, and the long lead is the anode or the more positive side. That's also normally indicated by having this kind of cutout on the edge here. The internal details of an LED aren't consistent. So there's an anvil shape and a post. The anvil can be connected to the cathode or the anode. It depends on the manufacturer or on the batch. So you can't use that detail to determine accurately which is the anode or the cathode. So that's something in my original version of the LED, which wasn't really that big of an issue. It's kind of hard to see on this diffused surface. You can see how it's here. So this is just a printed circuit board. I made slots in the legs and then I mounted it and soldered those in place. The LED is then mounted to the printed circuit board with a constant current regulator and a diode. So when I first looked to reproduce this LED, I made up a new circuit board here in basically the same orientation. So I wanted to make the leg square. So here I have a 3D printed leg. I was going to use this as a mold for making a cast. So the idea would be is you'd run a wire through the leg or solder it to the PCB and then have your circuitry in place. So what I had tried next is that I just sketched out roughly on paper and then into CAD a rough approximation of the anvil shape and then the post. So I made a mold out of silicone using this square brass tube. So I then cast some smooth on 300 resin into it. So using the dimensions of the wooden pieces I laser cut, the cast pieces of resin, I mocked up the approximate shape. They're a lot more flexible than I was hoping for, so I did have to come up with some way of stiffening these. For the internal details, I looked at using a 2mm brass threaded rod. I found, while looking around for kind of brass rods, I found this is a brass welding rod. I'm not sure if it's fully brass, but it's basically a brass colored welding rod. So this is a 1.6mm. I also came up with a different design for the mounting of the LED, a through-hole LED, and I've got the diode and the constant current regulator on the bottom. The brass rod can go through, and then I can solder this in place. I also made a surface mount version of the same. Make up a full cast version of the through hole and the surface mount to see what the difference is. The surface mount LEDs that I have aren't as bright as the through hole LEDs. That is one thing I'll need to look at more carefully. To connect into the bottom of the leg, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use 2mm banana plugs. So here I have a 2mm banana kind of socket. And then here's the plug, and that then slides onto the inside, making a nice snug fit. And then I can solder these sockets onto the brass rod. So here's the kind of internal details. So I have a kind of a PCB mounting bracket here to keep the legs in alignment. So these are the right length. The legs are soldered in up here at the top, and if I connect this up to power, we can see the LED shining. And here's the surface mount version of the same. So I'm just connecting it with a DC jack. So taking the internal details into consideration, I used the Shapeways 3D printing service to get these high quality 3D prints made. So a bit more accurate than I was able to produce using a desktop 3D print. Here's a sample piece. So you can see all the ridge lines. There's some internal kind of shaping detail here that allows the LED printed circuit board to mount neatly. So what I did is I stuck those to a flat surface, and I made a wall around them out of cardboard, and I poured silicone on top. And then I made another wall and I poured a plaster of Paris piece. So that basically produced something like this. So it's kind of a jacket mold with a silicone rubber insert. And then I poured on another layer of silicone and then another layer of the jacket mold. And so then I have a rigid case for casting multiple copies on my LED legs. And when I was casting them, I basically embedded the rod inside. So I then kind of injected the resin in with a bit of pipette. So here's a version where I've added some colour. So there's a mixture of silver and black, but you can see the legs are kind of sticking out and the sockets on one end. So I got a second version printed with Shapeways. So I've sloped this surface and this surface here just slightly, and hopefully those little slopes there will allow the air to escape and not get bubbles trapped in the resin. So once the mold is made, I will then insert the pre-soldered and tested electronic and then pour or inject the resin and then cast up the finished legs. So what I'm going to do now the next couple of days is I'm going to clean up this version of the 3D print and I'm going to make up a new silicone jacket mold. So I'm going to figure out how to mount the electronics accurately and also how I'm going to inject the resin in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. Thank you. Bye bye.